What's happening, y'all? CJ Kobliska here, Director of Programming from Gymnazo. We're gonna chat about how to load and work your glutes. There's a lot of shit around the social media pages on YouTube, on Instagram, on how to get your glutes fired up. The thing you're missing is how to load them up. And I'm not talking about throwing some mass on your back, on your chest, and then squatting and loading it up in terms of how much weight, but in terms of lengthening and loading, creating tension through the glute tissues. Now, it happens in three planes of motion. It happens with flexion, so we lengthen this backside. Standard way to get the glutes to fire up is to contract up out of there, even squeeze at the top. But I'm here to tell you it's more about the eccentric load, it's more about the lengthening, and that's what's gonna work the full glute muscle versus just contracting at the top and shortening in that already shortened muscle. So you got the sagittal plane, flexion. The other side is the frontal plane, which is gonna be the adduction. Now to get there, it's about a chain reaction from another foot stepping, a hand reaching, just anything to create an adducted position at this hip. It loads that lateral glute and TFL that comes down into the IT band. So you got lateral motion, lengthening, and then to come out of it, to shorten that muscle, and now getting the eccentric and the concentric tension to work the full muscle. The other portion, and I think is the most powerful and most underrated in training, is in the transverse plane. It's internal rotation. And I want to talk more about that in a second, but to get internal rotation, we can simply turn the toe in and do things from a toe in position. I exaggerated that quite a bit, so don't go too far. Or you can step across, create a chain reaction with the foot or with the hand that puts this leg, this hip, into an internally rotated position. That's gonna lengthen the whole rotational or spiral tension through that glute. So if you combine the three, it's flexion, it's adduction, and it's internal rotation. Now you've maximized that eccentric loading in the glute, and you're gonna get max power coming out depending on the range you go into. So a simple drill I like to take my athletes through is just body weight to sense this. There's the opposite way to go to turn off the glutes, or to not necessarily turn them off, but to contract them and shorten them as opposed to fully lengthen them. So I want to talk about that as well as we go through this. So what we do is basically a toe tap back. We start to prime this glute in the sagittal plane by taking a posterior tap, creates a chain reaction of flexion in this hip, which then loads this posterior side of the hip, that when we come out, it's contracting. It's working that muscle, but we've got to preload it in order for it to work. Think about jumping. And we can't just jump from this position. We could, there's a little bit of energy in the foot, but if we really want to jump, we've got to get that hip flexion or that loading, we call it transformational zone 1, to then explode. If all we focus on is the contraction and don't emphasize the loading portion, we're going to miss out on the full potential of this glute. Other way to go, we can take the foot either in front or behind to create an adducted hip position, and we can go for a squat. So you can go anterior, posterior, helps to kind of mix it up a little bit. Say anterior is kind of rough because you bump into this leg, but if you go posterior, you have a lot more room to drop into that frontal plane loading. It's not just the glute, it's of course hamstrings, it's quads, it's TFL, it's calves, but you're also getting a lot more of that adducted state to get the eccentric load on the lateral portion of the glute. Last one is internal rotation. So simply a tap across and a squat. Though you may be limiting your range in your squat, you're not getting as deep, you're saying I'm not getting much out of this, what you've done is preloaded this tissue in the transverse plane, so you've already lengthened it horizontally or spirally, that now when you drop down, you're gaining more loading rotationally through that glute. That's maximizing the potential through that hip. Now, if we go the opposite, to get shortened glute, we have extension, we got no squat, right? No hip to help out. So posterior gives us that squat. If we go same side lateral tap, it puts our leg and our hip here in an abducted position. It's like doing this. So it shortens this glute. We don't have very much room to go. It's loading up more the inner thigh. The other opposite of internal rotation is the external tap. And we drop down, we're gonna miss out on that glute training. So it's not a bad position here, just knowing that's gonna be loading your anterior and medial portions of the leg, where if we go posterior, lateral, and rotational, now we're maximizing a triplane load or tripling in this hip to maximize this side's potential. Now you can always go bilateral position. This gives you the flexion. If we go more narrow, that gives you the adduction. And if you go with internal rotation or slight toe in, that gives you more the internal rotation of the hip. Those are great ways to get more of a symmetrical stance to create glute loads on both sides. Probably a little bit safer too than going single leg. Now we call that a tweaked in squat because we're combining the sagittal, frontal, and transverse plane in the glutes assistance in that squat. So as we drop in, I am safest here. I've got this biggest muscle back here, this big booty to help me out, to then propel me forward. And why that's so important is everybody has a gait cycle. Everybody walks, and there's a reason we have a big back butt as opposed to a front butt. We don't walk like this most of the time. We propel forward. And you know how we do that? We load the back side to drive us straight ahead. So check this out. In our TZ1 of gait, or our first step forward, puts us into flexion. We're also in adduction because the pelvis slides a little bit. So now we've created a shorter angle here, thus loading the TFL, and the powerful one, that transverse plane, as we swing our other arm through, now creates this transverse plane torque. You can see this even through my core, that then propels us to our next step. So that tweaked in glute is innate in our gait cycle to provide us with the best power output forward. Flexion, adduction, internal rotation. You train those three, you will get better at walking, running, and jumping, because this sucker is now getting trained up. Now let's talk about loading this with weight in reference to those same positions. One of my favorite pieces of equipment, the ViPR. Why? Because it's got handles, it's got a top edge, we can tilt it, we've got a suitcase grip. But something I like to do with a lot of my athletes, just to initially train that hip position, is what we call a Coleman lunge matrix, or a forward lunge, a lateral lunge, and a rotational lunge, focusing on sagittal plane forward, frontal plane same side lateral, and transverse plane same side rotational. And as we add a ViPR tilt, it's gonna drive our upper body to pull us into, you guessed it, more flexion, more adduction, and more internal rotation. So if we line this ViPR up right in front of the same side foot that the hand is holding, it's gonna be your opposite foot lunging forward. Now, as we plant here and feel stable, a lot of things could happen. We can get up on the forefoot, the knee might wobble, but if we're talking about perfection and making progress in terms of the gait specific technique and tweaked in glute, we're gonna keep that knee kind of driving right over the foot as the upper body rotates over the top. We've got flexion, we've got adduction, we've got internal rotation, and it's all the way up through our lateral core, what we call our peltruncula. Pelvis, trunk, and scapula loading together. We pull back. Now that contraction from that loaded state is gonna provide us with better loading mechanics through this glute, and providing availability so that we can then create more capacity or sustain more capacity in the training. In that lateral motion, now we're focusing on getting that lateral drive. It's gonna give us a little more of that lateral tilt and put this hip into some adduction. And as we drop in, it's flexion, and again, internal rotation, all the way up to the thoracic spine, and popping back. Walking is not just the legs, not just the hips, it's also the core. Last one, two ways to go about this. We can emphasize the external rotation of that leg as we drop into the opposite side foot, but that may prevent you from getting deep internal rotation. So what you can do with that foot is pivot it and come through, and now you create a ton of torque, even internal rotation on the other side hip that's going to act as a simulation towards training for gait. So at full speed, straight from the other side, we got our anterior lunge, our lateral lunge, and either a foot planted or a foot pivot, and pop in back. We want to emphasize the leg that's stepping to propel us back from there. Another cool way to go about this is to load up that posterior side, and you got those three taps, and then combine the three. Posterior tap gives you the flexion. Lateral tap gives you the adduction. Rotational tap gives you the internal rotation. If you try to combine them, posterior, lateral, rotation, drop in. Holy moly, glutes are ablazing. And this one, not only that, the hammies, core, and the foot, building stability in all three planes of motion. Another one I like to go with, Powerblock. Love these guys. You can load it up, go a little bit lighter with it. Something we can mix in is that seam lunge matrix. But now we're gonna reach down and pop back up to a curl. It's a little less support than the ViPR because that's another point of contact on the ground when we are tilting it. Now if we go anterior, pull us into that flexion, that loading comes all the way eccentrically down to this arm, we pop it back. Now we're working our entire spiral and diagonal lines through this mix. No pivot, or with the pivot, your choice. Come back through. That's 40 pounds. If your hip can't handle that, go a little bit lighter. Another one with the Mace. Seen a lot more Mace stuff out there. Mace flows are dope, but also just more structural engineering for those hips. We go for an under-over grip, a little bit more ballistic curl style, but we slide in, whichever side the Mace is on, take that foot back and tap, step forward into a big stride. Check this one out. Now this loading, since that's the heavy side, it's gonna be pulling my left arm all the way across my diagonal to that posterior hip. We drop in, I'm loading up, I'm lengthening that whole posterior chain, and check it out, adduction and internal rotation. I pop back up, I drop back down. You're gonna come out of there, glutes of steel. You can switch them up, switch feet, drop it in. You can even travel one side and other side, getting your upper body and lower body to work together. Next one with the Sandbell. There's so many options with this. You're probably following along the patterning now, so I'm gonna mix it up. I'm gonna go just those foot positions again. I'm gonna focus more on sagittal plane. Let's go what we call RXX, or even right side stride. It's emphasizing that front leg, keeping that flexion. I'm loading this up now with excess load. Now I'm building capacity on what I've been able to access via body weight. I can do that LXX, working on my left side glute. Then we can go into narrow, working into more of our adducted position. You wanna get real wild with it. Toe tap across, drop in. Toe tap across, drop in. Internal rotation could be from the tap, could be from an arm reach. You can even put that weight up on the shoulder. Tap, drop in. Hey, maybe go forward, maybe get a little retrograde training, and there you get the gist. One more fun one with the ropes. This now turns it into a flow. It's a continuous motion. We can start in a stride. In my left TZ1 gait, I wanna make sure I'm getting that internal rotation and firing to pop that leg out. So if we're gonna fire up with locomotion, think about underhand sweeps, underhand rolls, and as you drop in, squat and roll, squat and roll. Pull yourself into that rotation, eyes straight ahead, and you wanna make it more specific to gait, lean into it. Add some speed, and see how quick you can roll through. Maybe even do a little matador. 1, 2, boom, 1, 2. You get on both sides, pop. Drop in, get low, pop it up. That's gonna give you some max tension there. Make it even more fun, single leg balance, take it back, take it to the side, take it to a twist, and now start popping through. That's how you load your glutes. Enjoy.